"Claire, sweetheart, you look so tired lately," my mother-in-law Violet said, placing a steaming cup of coffee in front of me with that concerned smile I'd grown to dread. "Maybe you should consider staying home today. Rest is so important for a woman your age." I wrapped my fingers around the ceramic mug, noting the slight bitter aftertaste that had become routine in my morning coffee over the past 3 months. "You're probably right, Violet. I have been feeling exhausted." What neither Violet nor my husband Logan knew was that I'd been secretly documenting every cup of coffee they'd prepared for me. And what I discovered was about to destroy both of their worlds completely. My name is Claire Mitchell, and at 39, I'm a pharmaceutical regulatory specialist for the FDA. For 12 years, I'd built a career detecting dangerous substances, analyzing chemical compositions, and ensuring that medications were safe for public consumption. I could identify drug interactions that others missed, spot contaminated samples from legitimate ones, and trace the source of mysterious chemical compounds through complex testing procedures. But sitting at my own kitchen table that Wednesday morning, holding a cup of coffee that contained God knows what substances, I realized I'd been the victim of the most elaborate poisoning scheme I'd ever encountered. The irony was devastating. I spent my days protecting the American public from dangerous drugs and contaminated substances, but I'd been missing the contamination happening in my own home. Logan Carter had been my husband for 8 years, and his mother Violet Carter had been living with us for 6 months since her supposed temporary financial difficulties. During those 6 months, she'd taken over our kitchen with the enthusiasm of a woman reclaiming her son's life, and I'd been too polite, too accommodating, too trusting to question her sudden devotion to preparing my daily coffee. "You work too hard, dear," Violet would say every morning, bustling around the kitchen with theatrical concern. "A woman shouldn't be so focused on career when she should be thinking about family. Logan makes enough money now that you could easily stay home and take care of him properly." Her voice always carried that subtle edge of disapproval, the implication that I was somehow failing as a wife by maintaining my professional life. Logan, meanwhile, had become increasingly supportive of his mother's suggestions. "Mom has a point, babe," he'd say, massaging my shoulders as I struggled to keep my eyes open by mid-morning. "You've been working these crazy hours for years. Maybe it's time to slow down, think about what really matters. We could start that family we've talked about." What they didn't realize was that a pharmaceutical specialist's mind never truly shuts off, even when being systematically drugged. Even through the fog of whatever they were putting in my coffee, part of me had been collecting data. Mental notes about symptoms, timing, and the suspicious coordination between my sudden fatigue and Violet's increased presence in our home. The symptoms were specific and consistent. Every morning I'd drink the coffee that Violet prepared with extra love, and within 45 minutes I'd feel like I was moving through thick syrup. My analytical thinking would become sluggish. My ability to concentrate on complex pharmaceutical data would evaporate. My colleagues at the FDA had started to notice my declining performance, my slower responses during meetings, my unusual struggles with chemical analysis that had always been second nature to me. But here's what Logan and Violet really didn't know. I hadn't actually been drinking that coffee for 3 weeks now. The moment I'd confirmed my suspicions through preliminary chemical analysis, I'd started an investigation that would make my FDA cases look like amateur hour. Because when you drug a federal pharmaceutical specialist, especially one who has access to the most sophisticated chemical testing equipment in the country, you better make sure your own substances are undetectable. They weren't. "I think I'll make an appointment with Dr. Emily Anderson today," I told them that morning, watching as relief flickered across both their faces. Dr. Anderson was our family physician, but more importantly, she was also my graduate school study partner and the only person who knew what I'd discovered. Logan and Violet thought I was finally ready to seek the medical help they'd been so lovingly suggesting, help that would probably involve a diagnosis of chronic fatigue or early menopause, medications that would make me even more compliant, even more willing to abandon my career and submit to their vision of what my life should become. What they didn't know was that Dr. Anderson had already run comprehensive toxicology screens on the coffee samples I'd been secretly collecting. What they didn't know was that I'd been wearing a micro-recording device for 3 weeks, capturing every concerned comment, every suggestion that I slow down, every carefully orchestrated conversation about my need to prioritize family over career. What they didn't know was that I'd traced the source of the drugs to a combination of over-the-counter sleep aids, anti-anxiety medications, and herbal supplements that, when combined in specific ratios, created a cocktail designed to make me docile, confused, and dependent. And what Logan and Violet definitely didn't know was that I'd spent the last month analyzing their true motivations through financial records, legal documents, and a paper trail that revealed a conspiracy far more sinister than simple family manipulation. "We just want what's best for you, sweetheart," Violet said, her voice dripping with maternal concern as she watched me hold the warm mug. "A woman needs to know her priorities. Career success means nothing if you don't have a proper family foundation." I looked up at her, noting the satisfaction in her eyes as she waited for me to drink. "You're absolutely right, Violet. Family should always come first." That was true. Family should come first. The difference was that my definition of family no longer included people who were systematically poisoning me while planning to steal my inheritance, manipulate my reproductive choices, and destroy my professional reputation to serve their own financial interests. As Logan kissed my forehead and Violet cleaned the kitchen with possessive efficiency, I walked calmly to the bathroom and poured the entire cup of coffee down the sink. Then I opened the encrypted files on my phone and reviewed the evidence I'd been compiling for weeks. Bank records showing Logan's gambling debts and Violet's mounting medical bills. Legal documents revealing their plans to have me declared mentally incompetent. Text messages between mother and son discussing how to handle the Claire problem permanently. But the most damning evidence was sitting in a secure laboratory across town. Detailed chemical analysis of every substance they'd been adding to my coffee, complete documentation of their drugging schedule, and video recordings from the hidden cameras I'd installed showing both Logan and Violet taking turns contaminating my morning coffee with practiced precision. The woman who'd promised to love and honor me through sickness and health had been making me sick. The man who'd vowed to protect me had been plotting against me with his mother since the day she'd moved into our home. And together they'd been planning something that required me to be weak, dependent, and legally vulnerable. What they hadn't planned for was that their target was one of the most skilled chemical analysts in the federal government. And today Logan Carter and Violet Carter were about to discover exactly how thorough a pharmaceutical specialist could be when conducting a personal investigation. The woman they thought they were slowly destroying was the same woman who was about to destroy them completely. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came in February, exactly 1 month after Violet had moved into our guest room. I'd always been sharp, focused, someone who could analyze complex pharmaceutical data for hours without losing concentration. My colleagues at the FDA used to joke that I had a computer for a brain, capable of detecting chemical irregularities that others missed entirely. But suddenly, inexplicably, I was struggling to complete basic analytical tasks that should have been routine. "Maybe you're just burned out," my sister Ava had suggested during one of our weekly phone calls. "You've been working in pharmaceutical regulation for over a decade. Sometimes our bodies just need a break." But I knew my own capabilities. I'd been the same analytically sharp person for years, someone who thrived on complex chemical puzzles and found energy in solving regulatory challenges. I ate well, exercised regularly, and had just completed my annual physical with perfect results. The sudden onset of cognitive fog didn't make medical sense, unless something external was interfering with my normal brain function. The symptoms were specific and disturbing. Every morning I'd drink the coffee that Violet had started preparing for me as part of her contribution to the household, and within an hour I'd feel like my thoughts were moving through molasses. My ability to focus on pharmaceutical formulations would disappear. I'd struggle to analyze chemical compositions that usually excited me. My supervisor, Dr. Sebastian White, had started asking careful questions about my recent performance. "Claire, your last 3 regulatory assessments have been inconsistent with your usual standards," he'd said during a private meeting in March. "Is everything okay at home? Any changes in your personal life that might be affecting your work?" That conversation had been a wake-up call. When the FDA starts questioning your analytical capabilities, you know something is fundamentally wrong. That evening I started paying closer attention to the patterns surrounding my cognitive decline. The mental fog always appeared after morning coffee. Always. On weekends when I slept in and Violet didn't prepare coffee, I felt completely normal. On the rare mornings when I woke up early and made my own coffee before Violet got to the kitchen, my cognitive function remained sharp all day. But every single weekday morning, after drinking the coffee that Violet prepared with such loving attention, I'd spend the day in a pharmaceutical fog that made complex analysis nearly impossible. Violet, meanwhile, had become increasingly invested in my daily routine. She'd wake up before both Logan and me, prepare breakfast with military precision, and present my coffee with the pride of a woman reclaiming her domestic territory. Her concern for my health seemed genuine, almost maternal, as she'd suggest I take time off work, encourage me to rest more, and constantly remind me that a woman my age should be focusing on family rather than career advancement. "You know, dear," she'd say while watching me struggle with morning alertness, "when I was your age I was already focused on what really mattered. Building a proper home, supporting my husband, preparing for the next generation. Career success is fine for young women, but at 39, you should be thinking about your biological clock." That particular comment should have been my first major red flag. Violet had never expressed interest in grandchildren before, had never suggested that Logan and I should start a family, had actually been quite vocal about wanting us to wait until we were more financially stable. Suddenly, during the same period when I was experiencing mysterious cognitive issues, she'd become obsessed with my reproductive timeline. Logan had become equally supportive of his mother's domestic agenda. "Mom's right, you know," he'd say during evening conversations when I complained about my struggles at work. "Maybe this is your body telling you to slow down, focus on what's really important. We've been talking about starting a family for years. Maybe now is the perfect time." The financial timing of this suggestion was another red flag. Logan's income as a freelance graphic designer had always been inconsistent, and we'd never been in a position where I could quit my federal job and maintain our lifestyle. But suddenly he was confident about our financial future, talking about supporting a family on his income alone, suggesting that my FDA salary wasn't essential to our security. When I'd asked about our sudden financial optimism, Logan had been characteristically vague. "I've got some big projects coming up," he'd said with a shrug. "Plus, Mom's financial situation isn't as bad as we thought. She's got some investments that are doing well." But I was a federal regulatory specialist, trained to detect inconsistencies and trace financial irregularities. Vague answers about sudden financial security were exactly the kind of red flags that triggered my professional instincts. So in late March, during one of my increasingly rare clear-headed moments, I decided to take a closer look at our household finances. What I discovered made my blood freeze. Logan had been accessing my retirement accounts without my knowledge. Small withdrawals, always under the reporting threshold, taken out systematically over the past 4 months. Money that was being transferred to accounts I didn't recognize, then moved again through a series of financial maneuvers that looked suspiciously like money laundering. But the real shock came when I traced Violet's investment income. Her financial difficulties weren't temporary, they were catastrophic. She owed over $80,000 in medical bills from a cancer treatment she'd never told us about. Her credit cards were maxed out, her house was in foreclosure, and she'd been borrowing money from loan sharks with interest rates that would destroy her financially within months. Violet Carter wasn't staying with us temporarily. She was planning to stay permanently, and she needed me out of the picture to make that happen. That's when I started documenting everything with the precision of a federal investigation. I began taking photos of my coffee before drinking it, noting changes in color, smell, and consistency. I started collecting samples in small containers that I hid in my office, using FDA equipment to run preliminary chemical analysis on the substances I was consuming. Most importantly, I started pretending to drink the coffee while actually disposing of it. Violet was so confident in her system, so certain I was too drugged to think analytically, that she never watched me closely. I'd hold the mug to my lips, make appropriate drinking sounds, then transfer the liquid to travel containers I'd secretly carry to work for proper analysis. Within 5 days of stopping the drugged coffee, my cognitive function returned completely. My analytical abilities snapped back like a rubber band. And with that clarity came a rage so focused and scientific that it terrified even me. The woman I'd trusted to live in my home had been systematically poisoning me for months. Not just poisoning, manipulating, gaslighting, and undermining my career while setting up a financial scheme that would leave me legally vulnerable and financially dependent. My own husband, the man who'd promised to protect me, had been actively participating in a conspiracy to destroy my professional life and steal my financial security. But Violet and Logan had made a critical error in judgment. They'd assumed that a drugged, compliant wife and daughter-in-law would be easier to control. What they hadn't considered was that stopping the drugs would leave them facing a fully alert, highly trained federal regulatory specialist who now had both the motivation and the technical skills to destroy them both completely. I reached out to Dr. Emily Anderson, explaining that I needed comprehensive toxicology testing for suspicious substances I'd encountered during a regulatory investigation. The results were devastating. A carefully calculated cocktail of diphenhydramine, melatonin, valerian root, and low-dose benzodiazepines, substances that, when combined in specific ratios, would create cognitive fog, memory issues, and increased compliance without causing obvious physical symptoms that would trigger medical concern. The sourcing was my next investigation. Violet had been shopping at 3 different pharmacies to avoid detection, purchasing over-the-counter sleep aids and herbal supplements that she was combining into a daily drugging regimen. The precision of her chemical knowledge suggested she'd researched this extensively, possibly with medical consultation. But the real breakthrough came when I hired a private investigator to monitor their activities when I wasn't home. The photos were devastating. Violet meeting with a probate attorney to discuss incompetency proceedings. Logan visiting a fertility clinic to discuss options for couples dealing with female cognitive decline. Both of them consulting with a financial advisor about managing assets for a dependent spouse. They weren't just drugging me to make me compliant. They were drugging me to set up a legal case for having me declared mentally incompetent, taking control of my assets, and possibly forcing me into medical procedures I hadn't consented to. The most chilling discovery was a series of text messages between Logan and Violet that the private investigator had captured through surveillance. How much longer before we can move to the next phase? Doctor says cognitive decline cases usually take 6 months to establish legal precedent. Once she's declared incompetent, we'll have complete control over her medical decisions and financial assets. That's when I realized the full scope of their plan. They didn't just want me out of my career. They wanted me out of my own life. They were planning to have me declared legally incompetent, take control of my FDA pension and savings, and possibly commit me to long-term care while they lived in my house and spent my money. They'd calculated that a 39-year-old woman showing signs of early cognitive decline would be a perfect target for financial and medical manipulation. But Logan Carter and Violet Carter had fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were targeting. They'd assumed that love meant trust, that family meant loyalty, and that a confused woman would be a helpless woman. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they'd been. By April, I had transformed into someone neither Logan nor Violet recognized, though they were too confident to notice. While they saw a wife and daughter-in-law who was finally succumbing to the cognitive decline they'd been orchestrating, I had become a federal regulatory specialist conducting the most important investigation of my career. Every move was calculated, every conversation recorded, every piece of evidence analyzed with the precision that had made me one of the FDA's top pharmaceutical investigators. The beauty of my situation was that Logan and Violet had given me the perfect cover story. They'd spent months telling everyone, our families, our friends, my colleagues, that I was struggling with mysterious health issues. That I was forgetful, confused, not quite myself. When I started taking time off work, when I began asking concerned questions about our family finances, when I seemed to lose track of conversations, everyone just assumed I was dealing with the cognitive problems that Logan and Violet had been so worried about. What they didn't realize was that I was documenting everything with federal precision. I installed microscopic surveillance cameras throughout our house, focusing on the kitchen where both Logan and Violet prepared my morning coffee. The footage was damning. Clear shots of Violet measuring white powder from multiple pill bottles, Logan crushing tablets with a mortar and pestle, both of them taking turns stirring various substances into my coffee with the practiced efficiency of a pharmaceutical team. But the cameras caught something else that made my blood run cold. Their conversations when they thought I was too drugged to understand. She's finally starting to really deteriorate, Violet told Logan during a recorded conversation in early April. Yesterday she asked me the same question 3 times about our grocery budget. I think she's ready for the next phase. How much longer? Logan's voice carried a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Dr. Peterson thinks we can file the incompetency petition within the next month. Once we have medical documentation of cognitive decline, we can move forward with financial guardianship. And the fertility treatments? That's the beautiful part, Violet said with satisfaction that made me nauseous. Once she's declared incompetent, we can make all her medical decisions. The hormone treatments will keep her compliant while we harvest her eggs. We'll have biological children using her genetic material, but she won't be legally competent to raise them or make decisions about their welfare. I had to pause the recording and step outside to vomit. They weren't just planning to steal my money and destroy my career. They were planning to use my body for reproduction while keeping me in a chemically induced state of helplessness. That conversation changed everything. This wasn't just about financial fraud or domestic abuse anymore. This was about reproductive coercion and human trafficking. I immediately contacted my supervisor at the FDA through encrypted channels. Without revealing the personal details, I explained that I'd uncovered a domestic pharmaceutical fraud case involving systematic drugging and potential human trafficking. Within hours, I was working with a joint task force that included FDA investigators, FBI agents, and specialists from the Department of Health and Human Services. We need to let this continue long enough to build a federal case, Dr. Sebastian White told me during a secure briefing. If Carter and her son are connected to the reproductive trafficking network we've been investigating, this could be our chance to expose a much larger operation. So I became an undercover federal agent in my own home. The hardest part was maintaining the appearance of cognitive decline when Logan and Violet were around. I had to remember to seem confused about simple tasks, to ask repetitive questions, to appear dependent on their guidance and support. Meanwhile, I was secretly coordinating with federal investigators to build a case that would not only destroy Logan and Violet but potentially expose an entire network of predators targeting vulnerable women. During the day, while Logan was at his supposed graphic design projects, and Violet was running her mysterious errands, I was actually working with a team of federal agents to trace their activities. We discovered that Logan's real income came from recruiting women for a reproductive trafficking operation. His graphic design business was a front for creating fake documents and marketing materials for illegal fertility clinics. Violet's role was even more sinister. Her medical background, she'd been a nurse before her retirement, made her the perfect person to manage the chemical subjugation of targets. She wasn't just staying with us because of financial difficulties. She was being paid to drug me into compliance as part of a larger operation that targeted professional women with desirable genetic profiles and substantial financial assets. The fertility clinic Logan had been visiting wasn't discussing options for couples with cognitive issues. They were planning to harvest my eggs without my consent, using them for commercial surrogacy operations while keeping me chemically sedated and legally helpless. "Your wife has excellent genetic markers," I heard during one of Logan's recorded phone calls in late April. "Advanced degree, attractive physical traits, no family history of mental illness. Her eggs will bring premium prices from our international clients. How long before we can start the extraction procedures? Once the incompetency hearing is complete, we'll have legal authority to make all her medical decisions. We can begin hormone injections immediately and start the first extraction cycle within 6 weeks." That conversation was played for a room full of federal agents. The task force realized we weren't just dealing with domestic abuse or financial fraud anymore. We were looking at a sophisticated human trafficking operation that used pharmaceutical manipulation to incapacitate victims while stealing their reproductive capacity and financial assets. The operation expanded immediately. We brought in specialists from the FBI's Human Trafficking Division, reproductive crimes experts, and international law enforcement coordinators. Logan's phone was tapped, Violet's activities monitored, their associates placed under surveillance. But I was still the key to the entire operation. The unknowing victim who would provide evidence of the systematic drugging and coercion that made their scheme possible. Meanwhile, their behavior at home became increasingly controlling. Violet had started scheduling medical appointments for me without my knowledge. "I made you an appointment with Dr. Peterson next week," she announced one evening in early May. "He specializes in cognitive disorders in younger women. I think he'll be able to help us understand what's happening to you." I played my part perfectly. "That's probably a good idea. I feel like I'm losing my mind sometimes." "Don't worry, sweetheart," Logan said, squeezing my hand with false reassurance. "Mom and I are going to take care of everything. You don't need to worry about making decisions anymore." Dr. James Peterson, I learned through our task force investigation, wasn't a legitimate physician. He was a former medical technician who'd been stripped of his license for conducting illegal medical procedures. He specialized in creating fraudulent medical documentation to support incompetency proceedings, often working with human trafficking operations to provide legal cover for their activities. The sophistication of their operation was breathtaking and horrifying. They weren't just planning to drug me into compliance. They were planning to have me declared legally dead to the world while keeping my body alive for reproductive exploitation and financial manipulation. By mid-May, we had enough evidence to arrest Logan, Violet, and their entire network immediately. But the task force wanted to document the complete scope of their operation, including the illegal fertility clinic and the international buyers for trafficked reproductive material. So I had to continue playing the role of the slowly deteriorating professional woman while secretly coordinating the takedown of my own husband and mother-in-law. The psychological toll was enormous. Every morning I had to smile at the people who were poisoning me, accept care from the hands that were destroying my autonomy, and pretend to trust the voices that were planning to steal my reproductive capacity and financial independence. But every evening, I reviewed evidence that would put Logan and Violet in federal prison for decades. "I think you should start working from home more often," Violet suggested one evening in late May. "Dr. Peterson says environmental stability is important for cognitive recovery." "That sounds reasonable," I replied, knowing that working from home would make it easier for them to monitor and control my activities. "But won't my supervisor be concerned about my productivity?" "Baby, you need to focus on your health first," Logan said with manufactured concern. "Besides, Mom and I have been talking. Maybe it's time to think about medical leave. The government has excellent disability benefits for federal employees with cognitive issues." The disability angle was new, and it added another layer to their financial manipulation. A federal employee on medical disability would have protected income, excellent health insurance, and legal precedent for long-term care decisions. They weren't just planning to steal my savings. They were planning to use my federal employment benefits to fund my own imprisonment. But Logan and Violet had made a critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that I would eventually become so dependent on them, so compromised by drugs and legal manipulation, that I would comply with whatever they decided. They'd never considered that their pharmaceutical regulatory specialist target might have the technical knowledge and federal resources to investigate the investigators. On May 30th, exactly 4 months after I'd first suspected something was wrong with my coffee, the task force was ready to move. We had identified 12 members of the reproductive trafficking network, traced over $2 million in illegal transactions, and documented a conspiracy that reached across state lines and involved corruption at multiple levels of medical and legal institutions. But before we moved on the larger network, I wanted Logan and Violet to understand exactly what they'd done. I wanted them to know that the woman they'd been systematically destroying was the same woman who had destroyed them. That Tuesday morning, I prepared coffee for all 3 of us. Something I'd never done during the entire time Violet had been living with us. Both Logan and Violet were surprised but pleased. "This is lovely, dear," Violet said, settling into her chair with the mug I'd prepared. "What's the special occasion?" "I just wanted to do something nice for my family," I said, sipping my own coffee while watching them both drink theirs. "You've both been so patient with me during this difficult time. So supportive and caring." "Of course, sweetheart," Logan said. "We love you. We just want you to get better." "I know you do," I said. "And I have some wonderful news. Dr. Peterson called yesterday and he thinks I'm ready to start the medical leave process. He's prepared to file all the paperwork for federal disability benefits." Both Logan and Violet's eyes lit up with barely concealed excitement. "That's fantastic news, Claire," Violet said. "I think medical leave will be perfect for your recovery." "There's just one small thing," I said, setting down my coffee cup. "Dr. Peterson mentioned that federal disability claims require comprehensive medical documentation. He suggested we have the FDA's Pharmaceutical Investigation Unit do a complete health assessment, just to make sure there are no environmental factors contributing to my cognitive decline." The color drained from both their faces simultaneously. "That seems excessive," Logan said carefully. "Not really," I replied. "I mean, if I'm going to be claiming federal disability benefits, the government wants to make sure my condition isn't caused by workplace exposure or environmental contamination. They'll test everything: my blood, my hair, samples from our home environment. Standard procedure for federal employees. Violet stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. I should start getting ready for my doctor's appointment. Of course, I said. But Violet, before you go. She turned back to me, and for the first time in months I let both of them see exactly who I really was. No drug-induced confusion, no helpless compliance, no vulnerable dependence. Just a federal pharmaceutical regulatory specialist who had been building a case against them for 4 solid months. The coffee tastes so much better when you don't add the diphenhydramine, melatonin, valerian root, and crushed benzodiazepines, I said quietly. Much more like actual coffee. Logan and Violet Carter froze in our kitchen, their hands still holding the mugs I'd prepared for them, and in that moment they realized that their loving, trusting, manipulated victim had never existed at all. What they'd been living with was a federal agent who had been investigating them the entire time. And now the investigation was complete. The silence in our kitchen was deafening. Logan and Violet exchanged looks of pure terror, their coffee mugs trembling in their hands as the full weight of my words settled over them. You're lying, Violet said finally, but her voice shook with uncertainty. You've been sick, Claire. Confused. You don't know what you're saying. I pulled out my phone and played a recording of her voice from 2 weeks earlier. Dr. Peterson thinks we can file the incompetency petition within the next month. Once we have medical documentation of cognitive decline, we can move forward with financial guardianship. Violet's face went ashen. Where did you get that? From the surveillance equipment the FDA installed in our home 7 weeks ago, I said calmly. Right after we identified you both as key figures in a reproductive trafficking operation. Logan nearly dropped his coffee mug. You're bluffing. You've been too out of it to investigate anything. You can barely remember conversations from one day to the next. I opened my laptop, which had been sitting closed on the kitchen counter, and turned the screen toward them. Displayed were pharmaceutical analysis reports, bank records, surveillance photos of their meetings with illegal fertility clinic operators, and detailed chemical breakdowns of every substance they'd been adding to my coffee. Actually, I've been having the most productive few months of my entire career, I said. Did you know you've helped us identify the largest reproductive trafficking network in the southeastern United States? The Department of Health and Human Services is recommending me for a commendation. Violet stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. This is impossible. You've been deteriorating for months. Dr. Peterson confirmed your cognitive decline. Dr. Peterson isn't a real doctor, I said. He's a former medical technician who lost his license for conducting illegal procedures. He specializes in creating fraudulent medical documentation for human trafficking operations. The FBI arrested him yesterday morning. Logan lunged toward the laptop, but I was faster. And more importantly, I was no longer impaired by their carefully crafted drug cocktail. I wouldn't, I said, standing up smoothly and stepping back. Agent Thompson and his team are listening to everything right now. Any sudden movements might make them nervous. As if on cue, there was a firm knock at our front door, followed by a voice that made both Logan and Violet freeze. Federal agents. We have a warrant. Violet spun toward the sound, then back to me. You destroyed us. No, Violet. You destroyed yourselves. I just documented it. I walked to the front door, Logan and Violet following behind me like people in a trance. Every morning for 4 months, you drugged my coffee with a carefully calculated combination of sedatives and anti-anxiety medications. Every day you told me you loved me while systematically poisoning me to make me compliant for reproductive exploitation. I opened the door to reveal Agent Sarah Thompson from the FBI's Human Trafficking Division and a team of federal agents, all wearing tactical gear. Behind them I could see news vans already setting up across the street. Claire Mitchell. Agent Thompson said formally, playing her part in the arrest we'd choreographed. We have some questions about reproductive trafficking activities in your household. Of course, I replied. I've been expecting you. Violet grabbed my arm roughly. Don't say anything, Claire. They're trying to trick you. You've been sick, remember? You haven't been thinking clearly. Agent Thompson stepped forward immediately. Ma'am, I need you to release her and step back. She's confused, Violet insisted, her grip tightening on my arm. She's been having severe cognitive problems. She needs medical attention, not questioning. Actually, I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. I've been having criminal family problems. But that's about to be resolved. I turned to Agent Thompson. Violet Carter and Logan Carter have been operating a reproductive trafficking scheme targeting professional women with desirable genetic profiles. Over the past 4 months, they've systematically drugged me with pharmaceutical sedatives while planning to have me declared legally incompetent so they could harvest my eggs for commercial sale without my consent. Logan's face had gone from pale to gray. Claire, what are you doing? My job, I said simply. I'm a pharmaceutical regulatory specialist with the FDA's Trafficking Investigation Unit. Did you really think I wouldn't notice mysterious cognitive symptoms that appeared exactly 45 minutes after drinking coffee every morning? Agent Thompson pulled out her handcuffs. Violet Carter and Logan Carter, you're under arrest for human trafficking, pharmaceutical fraud, conspiracy to commit reproductive exploitation, and aggravated assault with intent to cause bodily harm. Wait, Logan said, backing away from the agents. Claire, you don't understand what you're doing. The people we work with, they don't forgive betrayal. If you cooperate with federal agents, they'll come after you. They already tried, I said. Agent Williams arrested your associate Marcus Rivera yesterday when he attempted to break into my office at the FDA building. Agent Davis picked up Dr. Peterson this morning when he tried to flee to Mexico. And Agent Martinez has been monitoring the 3 men who were planning to handle the federal problem before I could testify. Violet stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. How long have you known? I suspected you were drugging me in February when I started experiencing cognitive symptoms that didn't match any known medical condition. I confirmed the pharmaceutical manipulation in March when I had my coffee samples analyzed. I identified your trafficking operation in April when I traced your financial connections to illegal fertility clinics. And I've been working with a federal task force since May to document every aspect of your criminal enterprise. The handcuffs clicked around Violet's wrists first, then Logan's, with sounds that seemed to echo through our foyer. You have the right to remain silent. But neither of them was listening to their Miranda rights. They were both staring at me with expressions of pure shock and what might have been grudging respect. You played us, Logan said quietly. No, I said firmly. You played yourselves. You assumed that because I was polite and accommodating, I would be easy to manipulate. You assumed that because I loved you, Logan, I wouldn't investigate financial irregularities in our household. You assumed that because I respected you as an elder, Violet, I wouldn't question your sudden interest in managing my daily routine. Agent Thompson finished the arrests and began leading them toward the door. But Violet stopped and turned back to me one final time. I did care about you, Claire. You have to believe that. Everything else was business, but I genuinely wanted what was best for our family. I looked into the eyes of the woman who had been systematically poisoning me for months, the woman who had planned to steal my reproductive capacity and financial independence, the woman who had betrayed every concept of family loyalty while living in my home. No, Violet, I said quietly. You cared about controlling me. You cared about having a compliant daughter-in-law who wouldn't question your financial manipulation. You cared about accessing my federal benefits and using my genetic material for profit. I stepped closer to her, close enough that only she could hear my next words. But you never cared about me. Because if you had cared about me, you would never have been able to drug my coffee every morning while telling me you were worried about my health. If you had cared about me, you would never have been able to plan my reproductive exploitation while pretending to offer maternal support. If you had cared about me, you would never have been able to look into my eyes and lie so convincingly while stealing my autonomy, and my future. Violet's shoulders sagged as the full weight of her situation finally hit her. What happens to us now? Now you go to federal prison for a very long time, I said. The human trafficking charges alone carry a 25-year sentence. The pharmaceutical fraud charges add another 15 years. And the conspiracy to exploit federal employees? That's a national security issue. That's life in prison without the possibility of parole. Logan found his voice as Agent Thompson tugged gently on his arm. Claire, I need you to know, I never wanted it to go this far. Mom convinced me it would just be temporary, just until we could get our finances straightened out. Logan, I said, looking at the man I'd been married to for 8 years, the man who'd promised to love and protect me, you participated in a plan to drug me into compliance, steal my reproductive capacity, and have me declared legally incompetent. There is no not that far when you're talking about human trafficking. Agent Thompson led them both outside, where a crowd of neighbors had gathered on their lawns, watching the spectacle with a mixture of shock and fascination. Logan Carter and Violet Carter, the devoted son and mother who'd seemed like such a loving family, were being arrested by federal agents while Claire Mitchell stood calmly in her doorway, showing no emotion whatsoever. What the neighbors didn't know was that I was feeling everything all at once. Relief that the months of deception were finally over, satisfaction that justice was being served, grief for the marriage I'd thought I had, and underneath it all, a burning pride in the work I'd done to expose one of the most sophisticated trafficking operations the federal government had ever encountered. Agent Thompson returned to the house after securing Logan and Violet in separate transport vehicles. Outstanding work, Agent Mitchell. This case is going to save countless women from exploitation. It already has, I said, watching the news crews position themselves for the best shots of the federal arrest. My life. My reproductive autonomy. My financial independence. My career. What's next for you? I looked back into the kitchen where I'd spent months pretending to drink poisoned coffee, where I'd played the role of a confused and vulnerable woman while secretly building the case that would destroy the people I'd trusted most. First, I'm going to make myself a proper cup of coffee, I said, without any pharmaceutical additives. And then I'm going to start the rest of my life. 8 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, preparing my morning coffee in complete peace. No hidden cameras recording the process, no fear of mysterious additives, no need to pretend anything. Just me, a French press, and the same French roast blend I'd always loved. The one that actually tasted like coffee instead of betrayal and criminal conspiracy. The morning news was playing on my tablet, and I smiled as I heard the anchor's report. Former nurse Violet Carter and her son Logan Carter were sentenced yesterday to life in prison without parole for their roles in what federal prosecutors called one of the most sophisticated reproductive trafficking operations in recent history. The Carters' conviction was secured largely through the undercover work of FDA pharmaceutical specialist Claire Mitchell, who documented months of systematic drugging while living unknowingly with the perpetrators. I turned up the volume as the anchor continued. Agent Mitchell's investigation led to the arrest of 23 individuals across 4 states, including several medical professionals who were creating fraudulent documentation for human trafficking operations. Federal authorities estimate that the network was responsible for the exploitation of over 40 women over a 3-year period. The case had made national headlines, not just because of the sophisticated nature of the trafficking operation, but because of the unusual circumstances of my investigation. The media had been fascinated by the story of a federal pharmaceutical specialist who'd been unknowingly drugged by her own family members while secretly building the case that would destroy them. Agent Mitchell's meticulous documentation and chemical analysis provided federal prosecutors with evidence so comprehensive that all defendants pled guilty rather than face trial, the news anchor reported. Her work has been credited with exposing systematic flaws in how trafficking cases involving pharmaceutical manipulation are investigated and prosecuted. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Ava. Saw you on the news again. Still can't believe Logan and Violet tried to turn you into a trafficking victim. Coffee date this weekend? I smiled and typed back, absolutely. And I'll make the coffee. The irony wasn't lost on me. Coffee had been the weapon Logan and Violet used to try to destroy my life, and now my morning coffee ritual had become a daily celebration of my freedom and autonomy. Every sip was a reminder that I had not only survived their systematic abuse but had turned their own actions against them with federal precision. My work life had transformed completely. The successful conclusion of the trafficking case had earned me a promotion to Senior Pharmaceutical Investigation Specialist, with a focus on cases involving drug-facilitated crimes. I'd become something of a federal expert on pharmaceutical manipulation in domestic settings, consulting on cases across the country where women were reporting mysterious cognitive symptoms in their home environments. You've probably saved hundreds of women from similar exploitation, Dr. Sebastian White had told me during my performance review. Your case has become required reading at the FBI Academy for agents studying drug-facilitated trafficking crimes. But the professional recognition, while gratifying, wasn't what mattered most to me. What mattered was the knowledge that I'd taken the worst betrayal of my life and transformed it into something that protected other women from similar exploitation. I'd received dozens of letters from women who'd read about my case and realized they might be experiencing similar manipulation. Some had discovered their own partners were drugging them with pharmaceutical cocktails designed to make them compliant. Others had identified financial manipulation schemes that paralleled what Logan and Violet had planned for me. Several had uncovered evidence of reproductive coercion that might have led to trafficking situations if they hadn't been alerted by media coverage of my case. Each letter was a reminder that my 4 months of systematic poisoning hadn't been meaningless suffering. It had been inadvertent undercover work that had exposed a predatory system targeting professional women across the country. Dr. Emily Anderson and I had coffee every Tuesday morning now, a ritual that started as professional debriefing but had evolved into genuine friendship. She'd been the one person outside federal law enforcement who'd known what I was going through during those terrifying months of investigation. "I still can't believe you held it together for so long," she'd said during our most recent coffee date. "Living with people who were actively poisoning you while pretending everything was normal. The psychological strength that required is extraordinary." "I had something they didn't expect," I'd replied. "Professional training in pharmaceutical analysis and federal investigation techniques. They assumed that love and family bonds would make me vulnerable, but those same bonds gave me the motivation to be more thorough and precise than I'd ever been in any professional case." The financial aftermath had been complex but ultimately satisfying. Logan's assets had been seized under federal trafficking statutes, including our former house, which I'd had no desire to keep anyway. Violet's debts had been absorbed into the federal case, meaning her creditors couldn't pursue me for any of her financial obligations. My retirement accounts, which Logan had been systematically draining, were restored through the federal restitution process. More importantly, I'd been awarded a substantial settlement from the Federal Victim Compensation Fund, money that I'd used to establish a foundation providing financial assistance to women escaping drug-facilitated domestic abuse situations. The Claire Mitchell Foundation for Pharmaceutical Safety had already helped 43 women get the chemical testing, legal support, and temporary housing they needed to build cases against their abusers. My personal life had undergone the kind of transformation that only comes from surviving something you never thought you could endure. I'd learned that I was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. I'd also learned that my instincts for detecting deception and manipulation were applicable far beyond pharmaceutical regulation. They were life skills that would protect me from ever being vulnerable to such systematic abuse again. Dating had been interesting since the case became public. Some men were intimidated by my story, apparently worried that I might be too suspicious or too independent for a healthy relationship. But others were drawn to the strength and competence I'd demonstrated under impossible circumstances. "You're the woman who took down a trafficking network from inside your own home," my current boyfriend, Dr. Marcus Thompson, no relation to Agent Thompson, had said during one of our early dates. "That's not intimidating, that's inspiring." Marcus was a forensic psychologist who consulted on federal cases involving psychological manipulation and coercion. He understood both the professional and personal aspects of what I'd experienced, and he appreciated the analytical approach I brought to relationships after surviving such elaborate deception. "You don't just trust blindly anymore," he'd observed. "You verify everything through multiple sources. Some people might find that excessive, but I find it rational and healthy." The legal proceedings had concluded with sentences that satisfied my sense of justice. Logan received 45 years in federal prison for human trafficking, pharmaceutical fraud, and conspiracy to exploit federal employees. Violet received life without parole due to her leadership role in the trafficking network and her history of similar crimes against other women that came to light during the investigation. Both had tried to negotiate plea agreements that would reduce their sentences in exchange for cooperation against other trafficking networks. But federal prosecutors had determined that my evidence was so comprehensive that their cooperation wasn't necessary for additional prosecutions. "Justice isn't just about punishment," the federal prosecutor had explained to me after the sentencing. "It's about protection. These sentences ensure that Logan and Violet Carter will never have the opportunity to drug and exploit another woman." The most satisfying aspect of the resolution was knowing that their plan had backfired so completely. They'd intended to turn me into a helpless victim whose reproductive capacity and financial assets they could exploit indefinitely. Instead, they'd created a federal case that would protect countless women from similar exploitation while advancing my career and establishing my reputation as one of the country's leading experts on pharmaceutical manipulation in criminal enterprises. As I finished my coffee that morning and prepared to leave for work, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 8 months ago, I'd been a woman whose husband and mother-in-law were systematically poisoning her while planning to steal her reproductive capacity. Today, I was a nationally recognized expert in pharmaceutical crime, a federal agent whose work was protecting women across the country, and a survivor whose story was inspiring others to investigate and escape their own dangerous situations. Logan and Violet had tried to destroy my independence, my career, and my autonomy. Instead, they'd given me a purpose, a mission, and a strength I'd never known I possessed. My phone buzzed with a notification from my work calendar. 10 a.m. Consultation call with Seattle field office regarding suspected pharmaceutical manipulation case. Another woman, another investigation, another opportunity to use my experience to protect someone from the kind of systematic abuse I'd survived. I grabbed my federal credentials, my case files, and my travel mug, filled with coffee I'd prepared myself, tested myself, and trusted completely. The woman Logan and Violet had tried to destroy was walking out the door to destroy more trafficking networks, one case at a time. And I was just getting started.